beginning.
It's the only time I'm awake. Let's go start this stuff again. Hey, Colin.
Hi guys, hi everyone.
Hi, Colin.
Hi.
Hey,
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Where's your green screen?
Feels the most exciting.
Yeah,
It's
it's,
the
it's getting washed, eh? It's been soiled far too many times.
Ah,
Too many pores on it.
I see, Michael. You have a wonderful green screen behind you, or is that real?
It's the 400-meter running track in Havana in Cuba.
Okay, well, I guess you're probably not there.
Of
It's
all
fun,
things. No world records will be set there, I don't think.
I think a lot of people have got that that background today, Michael.
Yes.
Well, we are just decompressing for another minute or two here, folks, and we'll get started shortly. As soon as we get all the people in the room, maybe 1 or 2 more minutes, just to let folks arrive. And for you newbies, this is the Wednesday Web Jam. We're on session 25, and today we have another special guest, which you'll hear about in just a minute. Oh, I love it when people are listening. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Wednesday, otherwise known as Hump Day.
Careful.
What day? What is that? What?
It's the hump. You know, you get over the hump
Oh,
your way down.
oh, okay.
You can interpret that however you want.
Ah,
Where your mind is.
Jesus.
Because I
We're
missed
trying
that.
to keep this as clean as possible because we
I
are
know. But
broadcasting on.
just if there's a day like that, just let me know because I want to be on the program. I didn't get that
part of it. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. All right, so I'm actually really excited about this Wednesday Web Jam. This is interesting. It's more practical than we're used to. It's going to end up with a very useful tool, I gather.
Yeah, in the end, at some point, yeah.
Yeah, at some point. So I don't know. I'm very excited about that because I'm not the most practical person. So I'm really looking forward to actually having something in the end that I can use.
Exactly.
So something to do with systems, and I love systems and design. That's great.
Well, isn't it the disruptive side of systems that you like most? It's
yeah,
system
I'd like to
like,
destroy.
please.
So if you make the system, can I then kind of destroy it again? That'd be the
you can,
thing.
but do you know me? Do you know me?
Yeah,
what I do with destroyed systems?
It's Hump the System Day, I think it is. Is that the? Sorry, Mark. Sorry, you started.
Well, I just wanted to do the initial disclaimer about the fact that we are streaming this live on YouTube and it will be recorded. So if you have a problem with your voice or your lovely face being broadcast to the rest of the world and reserved for posterity for all time, then perhaps now is to turn off your audio and your video. But we would prefer that you would all participate with your audio and video. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and get started and go to the next slide, please, Steve.
Agenda.
Yep, that'd be awesome. So we are officially on our way with the Wednesday Web Jam, and today is going to be about systems design thinking. So just keep that in mind. That's what you're going to be hearing a lot about. Our colleague Steve Bosak is going to lead this session. And what you're going to be doing in the session is we will break you out after Steve gives a short presentation about what that means. We will go into breakout rooms and you'll have an assignment and it will be around creating a systems map. And then we'll do this thing called popcorn feedback, which will be not all teams get to present, but whoever is brave enough will be able to present a couple of minutes about what they did during their session, what they came up with. We'll have a little bit of discussion at the end, but of course, those of you who know Wednesday Web Jam, we also have the backstage where we'll have deeper discussion. And then before we go back into the backstage, we'll preview next week's web jam, and we'll also extend an invitation to anybody who wants to continue the discussion about systems design thinking.
Great.
And with that, I will introduce our lovely speaker. No, before that, after that, beyond that, I will just remind everybody, please, if you're not speaking, put yourself on mute. And again, this is being recorded. So if you have any kind of issues related to you being recorded, you may want to turn your video off. And so I will introduce our special guest, Steve Bosak. He is a colleague and friend of mine based in Washington, D.C., with a career prior to becoming a design thinker and joining the US Design Thinkers Group team. Steve has a background in conservation, and we thought, hey, what better person to speak about systems than somebody who deals with natural systems, and that's one of the places where they use systems design. So I'm going to hand it over to Steve. Steve, off you go.
Thank you, Mark. Hope you can all hear me. So as Mark was saying, I've been working in conservation, mostly in environmental advocacy for many years, and actually used some design thinking and innovation processes in my conservation work. We wanted to talk to you about systems design thinking and how we can merge elements of systems thinking, which is a methodology you've probably heard of, with design thinking. And we want to first address why are we doing this? We're doing this because we have seen in our own work a need for tools that can help us understand the context of a problem. We in the US Design Thinkers Group do a lot of work in international development. So that is things like dealing with global health challenges, whether that's reproductive health in Africa or helping orphans outside of family care in Asia. We do a lot of co-creation workshops with USAID, which is our agency for international development. And they are asking us sometimes to look at a whole system before we start deciding where we're going to intervene in that system and make sure that whatever innovations we're going to do are not going to have unintended consequences in other places. So I'd like to show you one of the first systems map that I used in my work. This is kind of a rough systems map of an ecosystem challenge in New Zealand. I lived in New Zealand for a couple of years, about 12 years ago, and I worked for a government agency there that is responsible for protecting biodiversity in a large area of the North Island. It's also responsible for regulating farming and other elements of the economy there. If you can see on this map that I've drawn, here in the center is the ecosystem, different elements of it, like the kiwi and one of my favorite birds, the pea waka waka. Over here, just up to the right, we have Australian possum and a feral hog. These are the two of the biggest threats to biodiversity in New Zealand. They cause a lot of damage. They eat kiwis, they destroy habitat. And one of the things that we have to do in New Zealand to protect biodiversity is kill as many of these invasive pests as possible. So we created a map when I was in New Zealand of kind of where are the influence points? What are the things affecting the ecosystem? So that included the Crown government at the top here. The national government is called the Crown. It included the regional government over here to the side. It included obviously the agricultural industry, which is also impacted by these pests because they are vectors for disease that can affect livestock. It included tourism down here off to the right. That's a picture of Mark on his last trip to New Zealand. And then of course the economy is linked in there as well. So we wanted to choose the right place to intervene to improve the ecosystem. And the most obvious place, you don't necessarily need a map to show this, is the funding for pest control. And we worked on lobbying the Crown government and also getting allies in the agricultural sector to pump more money into pest control methods that would help us protect biodiversity in the Waikato region of New Zealand. So that's one example of how a system map can help you look at the context of the problem you're looking at and choose where to intervene. Here's an example of, it's a stakeholder map, more of a complex stakeholder map than most people do, but it, in essence, is showing the ecosystem around women's economic empowerment in developing nations. And we did this for USAID for a 3-day workshop. It came out of a 3-day workshop on ways to do blended finance, take private finance and public finance, and find ways to invest in women's economic empowerment and job creation in developing nations. So this is an example, you know, not exactly a systems map as you might think, but we're trying to represent all the stakeholders and then put them in different sectors. Next, I want to just review some of the major points about design thinking and system thinking and where they intersect and how they can be helpful. Obviously, design thinking, as many of you know, is user-focused. We want to understand our stakeholders and their needs and values. We're trying to come up with solutions. We do that with prototyping and testing things. And we're trying to come up with new, delightful solutions that are really focused on our stakeholders. In systems thinking, over to the right here, you can see that obviously it's systems focused. We're looking at the entire system where we're trying to understand the components and the flows between those components and how they impact one another. It's problem oriented. We really want to dive into what the overall problem of the system is, or if there's areas of different components that we can intervene to change or shift into a better condition. And it's aspiring for health of the system. We don't want to create an intervention in one part of the system that has an unintended consequence somewhere else in the system. So one of the things that system thinking can help you do is see, okay, if I change this over here, what's the flow-on effect later in the system? So they both, here, the column in the middle, encourage research to frame the challenge and solve the right problem. They're nonlinear and iterative. You can go back and test things and revisit your maps and your research to make sure you're approaching the problem right and you have all the information correct. And they're both innovative, right? The next thing we'd like to discuss is why we're merging systems and design thinking. Well, a lot of it's about improving our methods to identify the challenge area and the most relevant stakeholders. It's about getting a bigger picture view before we start innovating and creating solutions. There are a lot of problems that we're solving as design thinkers that have increased complexity and a lot of interdependencies. And we got to make sure that we're understanding those before we start meddling with systems. So we want to avoid system blindness would be one way of seeing this. And thinking that we know the problem and not understanding how it links to another issue somewhere further down the line, or maybe outside of our particular viewpoint. And then we can also test how our innovations shift the system. If we start with a systems map before we start innovating, we can go back and make amendments to that map and observe how that's going to change the system. So you're probably familiar with some sort of design thinking process. This is our design thinkers group double diamond, starting with a design challenge and going through the divergence of planning and empathizing, and then converging with a reframe. And then that second part is where a lot of the creativity happens with ideation and prototyping and testing. I've done a bunch of reading on system design thinking. It's something that has been discussed for a while. I don't think there's one accepted way to create a system design thinking process, but I'd like to show you one example that a guy named Daniel Ospina suggested in an article. And that here is kind of a series of diverge and converge processes, starting with researching stakeholders, defining the system, mapping the system, and then moving forward into what we would consider more typical design thinking activities such as ideating and prototyping. Just to give you a sense, I kind of view this first half of Daniel's process as the systems design part. I mean, researching stakeholders really is about getting to understand a system. And we already do that in design thinking. But here, Daniel's putting research stakeholders before he defines the system. I actually am going to suggest that we maybe do the stakeholder mapping after we do the system mapping. Let me give you a couple examples of simple system maps. I hope everybody can see this simple 3-component system or cycle.
Yep.
We call this a poverty, literacy, unemployment vicious cycle. A vicious cycle is something that reinforces itself to a negative consequence. So here, as the level of poverty goes up, the literacy rate goes down, right? You have poor people and families who are unable to support their kids in school, and the literacy rate declines, which means the level of unemployment goes up. And as the level of unemployment goes up, poverty increases. And then the cycle just continues again. So you look at a cycle like this and you say, where do I intervene to break this cycle and get it out of the vicious cycle? That is one way of using a system map to start an innovation process. Next, we have a little more complex or maybe larger system. It's a local food system. Marc found this one. And you can see how we start with growing at the top, growing your vegetables, harvesting, all the way through transporting to your local store, your eat, and then disposing. And if we've got a great closed loop system where we're using the waste to create compost and maybe food for livestock, we can get that back into the growing system. So this is the idea of a local food system that is kind of closing that loop, creating some sort of a green economic cycle. Okay. So we're going to show you how to create a simple system map. And we're going to give you an assignment to go into a breakout group and create a system map. And then we'll come back together and discuss what that was like, what challenges you faced, and how that might be useful in your work as a design thinker. So the first step of creating a system map is going to be to brainstorm the components of your system. Or you can do that with Post-its and Mural. We're just going to list all the components. You're going to have to create a boundary for your system. After you've listed all those components, what's going to be inside your system and what's going to be outside. And that's relatively an arbitrary decision, right? All systems are connected to other systems, but you have to decide which system you're going to focus on. So you're going to have to decide that, and there might be elements that you listed as components that are part of connected systems. You're going to arrange and connect your components next. You can do that with Post-its or shapes and murals, and you're going to use arrows to connect them, to show whether there's an information flow or a funding flow or a feedback flow or training. How are the components connected, okay? And then you're going to label those connections, right? Make sure you label what each connection is, so we know what's being exchanged between the components. Sometimes the flow moves one way, sometimes it's back and forth, and there's feedback. All right. I just want to pause for a second because I've just torn through a lot of information. Does anybody have a question? If you want, you can type it in the chat, or you can turn on your mic and ask.
Frankie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious about the second part, the create a boundary for a system, what lies inside and outside. So just to clarify, what lies inside means it's a system of choice, and outside is like all the different.
Yeah, so Frankie, I think I'm going to be able to explain this when I talk about the assignment here.
All right.
So let me try to address that on the next slide. It's a good question.
Thank you.
The breakout group assignment is, we're going to ask you to create a system map of an education system during COVID, right? With COVID restrictions. It could be primary, secondary education system, or university level. we're making an assumption here that many of you have experience either personally right now with children or relations, or you're teaching, or you're attending school through some sort of remote way, or maybe you're going back to school in person and there's a lot of restrictions around how you interact with people. So how would you map an education system with COVID restrictions and considerations? So Frankie, obviously you might say like there's a Ministry of Education, right? But you might decide that that's outside the local system that you want to focus on, which is more the school and the teachers and the parents and the families and the kids. And that will be your system that you're working within. You might ignore the larger pressures outside, which I'm sure are related. I'm sure there are policy issues and things like that that might come from a Ministry of Education, or maybe a Ministry of Health or something like that. And you can, and you're welcome to connect those in if you want. But, you know, I think it's kind of an understood statement to say we're all part of multiple systems, right? I mean, we're part of a family system that's part of a neighborhood, that's part of a state, et cetera. Right. And you're just going to have to decide, where do I focus my work right now?
Yeah, and we'll give more instructions on that real quick, right?
Yeah, and so you're going to develop a system map. We have instructions in the mural. Mark's going to go over that. And then after you develop your system map, we would like you to figure, where would you make your intervention? Where would you focus your innovation process in there? And that's what we're hoping to get to. So I'm going to pass it on to Mark. I'm going to stop sharing.
No,
Mark,
if you could share that last slide, that would be great.
It's right there, mural for breakout sessions.
Perfect. Okay. Perfect. Thanks, Steve. Excellent overview of systems design and this thing we're toying with, which is systems design thinking, the overlap of the two. And Steve, if you'd throw that slide back up again, please. Or I can do it. That's fine. Oh,
sorry, I stopped sharing.
You got it? Anyway, no, we're gonna throw you guys in. I'll start sharing. We're gonna throw you guys into Mural, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Mural, that's perfectly fine. We will. You'll have somebody in your room, no doubt, who is familiar with Mural. But really quickly, the last slide I wanted to highlight was this one here, and I know you're seeing my whole desktop. Well, I mean, maybe not seeing anything. Are you guys seeing my screen? Yeah. So when you get into your breakout room, just make sure that you look up in the upper left-hand corner in the mural, and we're going to put the links to the murals in the chat in just a second. But just make sure you're in the right room, that you've clicked on the right link to go to the right room, depending on which room you end up in. So I'm going to send you breakout rooms, and then once you're in your breakout room, click on the appropriate link that one of my colleagues is going to put in the chat right now for all the murals. There we go. Thank you, Yun Yen. And once you get into your room, if you go into room 4, just make sure you click on the link to the mural for room 4. As you do that, what you're going to see, if you don't know anything about Mural, you'll be able to zoom out on the template that we put in there, and it's pretty much a blank canvas. But the difference is we put detailed instructions to the left and kind of an example of what good looks like. So when you get to the point where your team is done, we're going to give you about 17, 18 minutes to do this activity. What we want you to do is silent and solo, just brainstorm the components of your system. That could be subsystems, but just silently, each of you go to a corner or something like that and brainstorm, then share and deduplicate and group into components are the same. And then once you've done that, spread them out, create some sort of organization. Like this is just a mind map looking thing. You could create a circular thing, or you could create whatever. And then put the labels, make sure you got labels on that, and then make your connections. And then finally, if you have time, you can, as Steve mentioned, you can think about where you see weaknesses in the system or something like that. For those of you unfamiliar with Mural, when you get in there, just double click and it will create a Post-it note or a sticky note. You can then type in some text. You can zoom in with your mouse or your tracking pad And you'll see that the one that's highlighted is outlined in blue. I'm going to double click over here and create another note. And then I'm going to show you how to link these together. And the way you do that is you go over here in the menu on the left-hand side, you click on this little curved arrow, it creates an arrow here. I'm going to grab it, and as I move it to this post, it says it's connected by outlining the other one. And then I'm going to grab this end here, and I'm going to connect it to this one, and then I can zoom in and move this little node so that it looks like a nice little connection. That's pretty much all you're going to need to do. So I just zoomed out of the mural. And Steve, I'm going to hand it. Well, I guess tell me, are we ready to roll? Can we put people in the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I think we're ready to go. I saw some questions in the chat about the systems. I'm going to share stuff later with all of you so you can have those images. But for now, just go ahead.
Yeah, so we're just going to throw you into breakout rooms. You guys know, who have been here before, how that works. Have a discussion. If nothing else, just have a discussion about systems design thinking, how the design thinking and systems design worlds may come together. Hopefully, you'll be able to explore this idea of the education system in the COVID area. Off you go. I'm going to hit the hyperspace button. You'll land in a breakout room, and we'll bring you back in about 17, 18 minutes. Bye. Okay, I'm going to get you guys into a room. And just hold on, bear with me for a second. All right. Okay. All right, who do we have? We have Michael. Michael, are you a wandering nomad? I had you in room 4, and I really need you in room 4. Let's see.
Do you mean Funowich?
Sorry?
I think that there's a fellow here, or a person that I see that's
Thorley is who I'm trying to move. But Michael, did you get can you check to see if you don't have a hidden alert somewhere to join the...
You might have to open another window for it to say join.
And then who do we have here?
We just got somebody back.
Yeah.
Matt Thunberg. Oh, we lost one person, we gained Matt.
Hey, Michael, I'm going to put you in room 1.
Okay.
And I'm going to put these other, and then I'll put people in other rooms. They're going to have an uncomfortable experience of being moved.
We like that.
Did you get a notification, Michael?
More.
No, not yet. I'm minimizing my screen as well. No, not yet.
So for the folks on YouTube,
we're going to do a system map.
We're going to do a system map. I'm really yeah, it's really cool.
And Mark, we need to get into a mural together.
Yeah, and Michael, you can just hang out with us.
Okay.
Yeah,
and Merritt as well.
He's just refusing to go.
Michael's family.
I don't see any. No, I have no clue. No.
That's what happens when you just keep hanging out. People are like, God, just come home.
It's just the new, some people are kind of, when they know they're going in a breakout, they leave. And other people just ignore
Mark,
it.
I see some teams are asking how much time is left. Can you broadcast?
17 minutes now.
Sorry?
17 minutes from now.
17 minutes from now?
Mm.
You got the time? We're on time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mark, where is our breakout room? Which one do you want to send? Excuse me, our mural.
16.
And where is that?
What's up?
Oh, it's on WhatsApp. Okay, sorry. I was not in WhatsApp.
I know.
And
A lot
I'm
of
not
windows.
part of your WhatsApp group.
Lucy is saying that Miro is more convenient for making system maps.
Oh, well.
Sorry.
Okay. Should we see if
Maybe,
we
but we're using the other one.
yeah. I
Oh,
wish
wait,
I had a
that's
Mercedes instead of a BMW, because the Mercedes has that little emblem on the front. It still goes really fast and it has 4 wheels. So should we make a system map, guys?
Yeah,
Room
let's
16.
try.
Do
Let's
we have
try.
a link for Michael?
So
A guest
let's-
link?
I've just sent you.
So
Yeah,
Michael, the
I've got
link
it.
is in the, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
So I can, I think
Ignore
the
it.
easiest thing to do, everybody, is we're going to brainstorm components. So just
Okay.
make Post-its that represent components of the education system during COVID, and then we'll share. So just go ahead and start listing them. And for those of you watching from your living room, we're just using Mural. And actually, we should, Mark, can you show the screen? the
Yes,
Mural
I will
screen?
share. Yes, indeed. Great idea. All right. So
So-
here's. Is this a challenge to see who can make the biggest Post-it note?
Why are your post-its so big? Am I so? What's wrong?
We're American. We like big Post-its.
American.
My eyes are old. I can't see.
That's another problem that I admit to.
There is also Mr. Hamed Ye in the waiting room.
Oh,
Oh, and we have Marit and
hold on.
Patrick.
I just admitted him. Yeah.
Yes.
I think we just keep the people that have arrived can just join us here in the main session.
Sorry, I have to drop out. I had no audio and also no Mural link, so I had to reboot my
Oh,
iPad.
well, just join us in here, Patrick.
Okay.
Patrick and Hamid and Merritt, we just posted a link to this mural in the chat. You can go there and find your way into this mural. And what we are doing is just listing components of the education system during COVID. So it's a little crazy right now. People are just posting stuff all over. Mark, have you shared that screen?
Yep. Can somebody check to make sure it's being shared? So we got about 10 more minutes.
"13 and 30 seconds.
13.
Okay, should we stop listing and try to make sense of this, do some deduping and grouping? We've probably got enough to get started. We don't have to do a comprehensive map. We just want to show the basic system. So you, Yen, do you want to tell us what some of your Post-its are?
Yeah, I did concentrate it, or especially families, people, parents, grandparents, sport club trainers. Those are that popped up in my mind.
Okay.
Teachers,
and
yeah.
how about Michael? Michael, do you want to tell us what some of your components were?
Well, I didn't put anything on because I don't know how to use
Oh.
Mural.
You're very helpful today, Michael. Really nice.
I've got lots of
I don't
ideas.
know
But
if Hamid or Patrick had a chance to do anything. Or Pedro, easy.
So I like that transportation. So how to get to school. So it might be maybe you brought by car, maybe you're like Dutch children being on a bicycle, or maybe you need to take a bus. I think that's the.
So this is a critical decision to make. Are we in a system where people are actually going back to school in person, or are we in a system where people are doing school remotely? Because I think
you could be in both, because it's a mixed economy. Certainly in the UK, people are doing both.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I've heard of some kids that are going to school twice a week.
Yeah.
In person, and then the rest of the week is online.
So we'll do a hybrid system.
Yeah.
Is that determining our boundaries, or is that just kind of another?
I think it is. In the sense, what I'm trying to determine is, let's choose maybe it's easier to say a remote or an in-person system to define it.
Okay.
Do people have a choice, remote or in person?
I'd go for remote, because it's just different and we might see more of it from a learning point of view.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, what we want to do is start creating some sort of a map with all these Post-its. We want to get them in an order, whether that's circular, rectangular, whatever, but it's good to get a basic outline with those Post-its of what the flows are, what connects to what. And obviously, one component can be connected to more than two other components. It's not everything is a perfect cycle, but
so
does somebody?
Sorry, so
does somebody want to?
Sorry,
so
I have a question about.
That's okay.
So can I ask a question? Sorry. Yeah, I just
Yes.
so do we? Is the so it is a system, but do we also map sort of so you would talk about consequences and so how do we map sort of the consequences that we see of this change in behavior? So the map itself is kind of now looking at schooling when people are remote, so they stay home, also, and maybe also the teachers, and maybe specifically the kids, and it also means that maybe the parents have, well, they already maybe are working from home, but something's changing there. But they also will kind of do things like they will have their lunch at home, so there will be, so the store they go to might change because all of a sudden everybody's home instead of being at school and having school lunches. So the catering services are affected. Right. So how do we deal with it?
So we have to we are going to have to think of a boundary. We're going to create a simple system now. There's obviously, so the food system obviously links into the school system, the technology systems links into it. Let's think about, my suggestion is we think about how are components of the education system related to schooling children right now. How are they connected? And we talked about naming components. I mean, certainly a component is the home education experience and the in-school education experience. Those are components of this system. Apart from just being a parent or a family, there is that experience that we're creating. So I see people doing some linkages.
So, for instance, so the boundaries. So again, so I think that because I think the biggest question would be boundaries or focus. So, for instance, this changes a lot of things. For instance, Microsoft Teams. I don't know about this in the US, but I think a lot of the schools use Microsoft Teams. All of a sudden, that affects, either positive or negative, but it affects that organization, a company. So are they then, because we're looking at remote, is Microsoft part of that systems map, or these kind of organizations?
These are all questions we would have to answer. What I recommend right now is we try to pick the most basic components. So Ezekiel's got a circle drawn around very basic, I mean, families, parent, child, but I suggest we kind of focus on, you know, teachers, parents, kids, school administration, try to get some of those basic things in the system. And that's where, again, a boundary is arbitrary. You have to start with a boundary somewhere, and you can always expand that boundary or create other boundaries outside to show how other systems work.
So it would be true to say, so I've just moved teachers onto the boundary because the role of the teacher is actually changing and is more distant from a child, but the family and grandparents have become closer into the system.
I mean, I would say you could, I would move, you know, teachers in this system. Like, I think teachers in a way go up here. I would actually move, I mean, I think families, grandparents, and parents, by the way, are related. So I'm just kind of pulling them. There's, in a way, it's like a subsystem. I'm going to make this a little bigger, this circle. I'm going to put, I'm having trouble shifting around. I'm going to say teachers, and then you, oops, sorry. I would say child, which is, and kind of in that system are the, you know, parents, grandparents, families. And then I'm going to dedupe a little bit. We've got teachers, we've got school administration here. We've got school system funding. I would imagine you might think of public health officials somehow linked in here. I see somebody's got an interesting, is that Pedro down below is students, transport, school supply vendors, safety equipment suppliers. I'm working on the top circle. You know, obviously we got school system funding. Maybe we've got, I'm going to use technology firms as just a more general representation of internet service providers and, you know, people doing Zoom. So if you look at this, you've got elements of this. Obviously you need funding, you need technology, you need school administration, you need health officials to tell you what's safe and what's not. You need safety equipment if you're doing anything in school. And we have to draw connections between these things. For now, I'm gonna take out grandparents and parents and just focus on child with families, because the families are a support network. Again, I'm just trying to make this a simpler system so that we can comprehend it.
Steve.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, so just pause for a second. So you've got a cluster that is related to school subsystem. Is that fair?
That I'm trying to create a system about one school, you know, and that there's the things that are involved in that. I've actually, in some ways, the higher level actors are lower in that circle because it's school system, funding source, school administration, public health. And then the teachers and the families and child are near the top.
Let's hear what other people think real quick.
Yep. Anybody else with reactions to that circle?
Well, I'm not a parent, but I'm curious to hear from the parents who are in this situation right now. What are you experiencing? What do you see?
Yeah, I experienced that coming from the posted families. Yes, there are connections or information or even persons that you need to talk to or you get information from, or they play a big role in your daily conversation, trying to keep your kids safe. Safety equipment, public health.
We have about, sorry, we have about 4 more minutes. 4 more minutes.
One of the things, so family is also, for me, there's also a big component of friends, yeah, people who also have, like, you specifically the sort of friends that are also at the same school as my daughter, so they're part of that. So there's also part of that support system because of parents having to work. I mean, so I'm kind of interested in the choice you make, because you make a choice of, you focus on something and you make it really simple. So I think that's interesting also to say, well, make it as simple as possible so you can understand it. I kind of like that, because my experience with systems thinking and systemic thinking is that it becomes too complicated quite quickly, and then you don't know what to do, because you can make systems maps of this. You can make it very academic and extremely complicated. So I like it, but it's also sort of, there is this feeling of, that you might make it too simple. And so you actually, again, you think you understand what happens, but you don't, because you forgot all the nuances and the details and all that. So that's an interesting balance, I feel. And also in this, because there's so many other things that you could put in the map, or the focus area where so that's a kind of curious about how you make that decision, obviously, because you know why you're doing the map, I guess. We made it, yeah, anyway, so that was sort of what I was thinking.
What I like very much about this map is it makes you think, what am I lacking? Am I overlooking something that somebody else did add?
Exactly.
Yeah, it does make you, silent a little bit and reflect on,
well,
I see reality like this all the time.
So is the question then, so to your point, Union, so obviously the tool is supposed to make you think and make you understand and reflect, right?
Yeah.
But in design thinking and service design, et cetera, the tools we often use are also there to have a conversation, so it's the making of the map that is actually quite important, because it's actually, while you're making the map, you're creating connection with the people you're doing it with. So which means, is it a tool that, is it about co-creating, and is it about the conversation that it sparks, or is it the end result? Because a lot of the if you think about systems thinkers and systemic thinking, that it often feels more like it's sort of you get the map, and then the map is the result. But now here, the result is the conversation that we had and the deeper understanding.
It still works both ways for me. So it's as if you are asking me, okay, be sharp, be aware. You can use it both ways all the time. And in the conversation that you're either guiding or you are participating in, be alert. And that's how you learn and bring the whole conversation a step further.
Mm-hmm. Yep. A great place to sorry, we need to be bringing people back. I'm going to go ahead and put the 60-minute timer, close the rooms, and they'll have 60 minutes. Some people will come straight back. Are you guys ready for that?
Yeah, Michael, go. What did you want to say?
I was going to say, there's one thing putting things in it in an objective way, but if you get people to represent the elements and stand on the elements, you get a felt remembrance of the system, and you can feel what is missing and where the system is weaker or stronger.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is sort of literally put it on the floor.
Yeah. And then so to your point, Arne, it gets rid of the talking about it. You get in it and experience it. Otherwise, it's overly complex.
Yes.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, I like that very much, Michael. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's for sure is that trying to do a system map in 18 minutes is a fool's errand, right? As we say. It's very, very difficult.
Well, yes and no. In a way, it depends a little bit on the goal. I think you can, so suppose you're talking about a topic, and while doing that, and actually to Michael's point, if you write it down, if you are able to be in the same location, you write it down, you put it on the floor, while kind of and so I think it's it can be really, this was really quick, and I actually did kind of learn, and I might not have learned a lot of new things for myself, but I did learn a lot about what kind of we have similar, and that we have similar kind of thoughts about that, which is really interesting if you want to move forward, because now I know that, oh, okay, so we're kind of all thinking on the same line, or we have totally different kind of perspectives, or we have the same questions, or et cetera, et cetera. So making it explicit, I think, is really nice in the process. I'm just wondering, so to my kind of understanding now, if I sort of see this and the way we've done it, the way we usually do sort of value mapping, we usually do stakeholder value mapping, and we just show people. And we often get the question, can I put a thing, a product, a thing into the map? And when we say no, it's only about human beings, because that's where the value flow goes. But here you actually do put in, like, you know, a computer, internet access, or you know, stuff as well. Yep. Right?
Yep.
So
absolutely. Sorry, Steve.
We'd like to hear from everybody some examples. What was that experience like for you? Difficult, easy, frustrating? Anybody volunteer?
Can we stop sharing screen and go back to Gavin?
Yeah, sure. I mean, two quick things. One is, of course, the issue of learning to ride the bike while you're trying to use it to get somewhere, which is the Mural experience for me, you know, trying to figure out how to use Mural, but I know that will come, but it's distracting. So the key issue for me was trying to figure out what criterion does one use to determine what's inside the system and what's outside the system. And we resolved that by saying, okay, we're going to focus on day-to-day functioning within the time of COVID, but I have no idea if that's useful or not useful. Or so the question is what criteria to use for determining what's in and what's out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that would be necessary, and we didn't give you those instructions. We wanted to have you have to wrestle with that.
Well,
anyone else?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think that rather more things are within the system than less things, because that's what makes systems to try to catch the whole complexity. What I also found these kind of exercises is that on the first hand, it's rather straightforward to define and identify the components of a system. But then putting the feedback loops between them and how each component influences each other in which way, this is the more complicated, complex stuff to figure out, and needs way more time. So we were kind of able to figure out components, but then having the time to make all the connections needs more thinking.
Yeah, I think, go ahead, Jennifer. Sorry.
So I echo on we need more time. I think in our breakout room, you know, we have 4 people coming from 4 different countries. So we first discussed, you know, what system are we talking about for is it for each country, or is it, you know, international? Then we quickly, in the spirit of co-creation and collaboration, you know, we quickly landed on several big clusters. And I think it got smoother than, you know, the ideas were flowing. So yeah, we didn't feel like we had enough time. And then we thought about, oh, you know, the big cluster. Then we're like, okay, how about transportation? How about technology? How about this? How about that? So I kind of saw that, you know, divergent process coming, but we didn't reach to the convergent part. Then we were, you know, dragged to the big room. So that was my, you know, experience so far.
So what I would like, here is Claudia speaking. So what I would really like to say is it really helps taking deeper conversations while mapping it out, and to really think about what is really there, like to go to the root cause of the problem, not rather than first to the solution. We have but really trying to go to the root cause, and of course, especially in societal issues and these kind of things. Yeah, it's really necessary to go deep, and this systems mapping really show things how they are, or not necessarily how they are, but what is there, and things that you maybe never have thought of.
Echoing what you're saying, Claudia, we had an awesome discussion in room 11 till halfway, and we talked about higher education, and until halfway we realized we haven't talked about any student at all at that moment. And that's interesting too, that you peel that onion, but well, move away sometimes from what's really the core, and that conversation is helping as well to go back to it.
It's a great segue, I think, Jeroen, into just a question, what people think is this intersection between design thinking and systems thinking, because I personally believe that, and I'm not the only one, but I think that having design thinking is a really powerful, I mean, of course, I believe in that. Without looking at the larger system, you can't come up with solutions that are robust and sustainable, if that's even possible. And then the other component that I think is really critical in the sort of triad is sort of the behavior, the human behavior side of it. So the behavioral economics. So I'm just curious what other people think about how systems thinking and design thinking come together.
I think what is really, what really struck me was yes, that system thinking and drawing a systems map is really about complexity. It's not about quantity. Like design thinking, you add just one, and you as many as you can, and you can't just do that. You can throw influencing factors onto the map, but then you get into the discussion and you need time. And another one is, and then other people are thinking differently, and yeah, you need more time, but it does help a lot to have the things on the map. And even from that short time, and I agree it was too short as always, you could get an impression how the mapping helps to see connections, but you have to discuss them. And then it's another level to see what direction does the influence go? Does it go backwards and forwards, or is it just one? And yeah, that takes time, and the discussion would be really profound whenever you let it be.
Absolutely. We have time for one more comment or thought before we're going to have another half an hour for backstage for those of you who aren't familiar with Wednesday Web Jam. But so we'll have another half an hour for general discussion. But yes, Johanna.
Yes, I was thinking with this discussion that for me, it's kind of even difficult to separate design thinking or service design, as we many times call it, about the systems thinking, because I always see that the system level is the context for the thing that we are developing or designing. So we can't overlook that ever, because then you can't design something out of the context.
Right. So, Johanna, that's a great point. And one of the things we'd like to do next is, because we are still delving into what system design thinking is. I don't think there's one understood method for that. We do see it as useful in understanding a context and complexity in a system. We'd like to design a tool that helps integrate system thinking into design thinking. And we want to invite people here, some volunteers, to work with me and Mark and anybody else on our core team to come up with that new tool over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then we would come back and report on how to use that tool. So it's sort of a crowdsourcing of, how do we develop a way to really implement system design thinking. We don't think we have the way, and we've got all these creative and analytic minds here. So we'd love to invite you to that. And Mark, I think you're going to show me a slide on how people can sign up to be part of that group if you want to be, right?
I do believe that that slide is showing. Is that correct?
Okay. It may be. I just
Mark just one. I don't know.
However,
Maybe it's me.
yeah,
Maybe it's me
working.
because. Right. Yeah.
But just if you hold on just a second, it's a permissions thing with Google Drive. I'll fix that. Just keep going, Steve. We've got 1 more minute. Maybe we should. I'll flash this back. We will also send this link, and I think somebody will put it in the chat so that you can just click on it through your browser. If you're interested in joining us to kind of co-create a tool or a template that we can use in a workshop, please sign up and we'll let you know what we come up with in terms of a plan. But it's really just an invitation to continue this conversation about systems design thinking. And so with that, I'd like to go, Steve, you want to acknowledge just quickly, we'll also put these links in the chat. And I'm assuming.
So we have a bunch of references that I used to prepare for this presentation. I just put those in the chat. So you can do a little exploration on yourself.
Awesome.
And then I'll also share my PowerPoint with everybody later. And then Mark, you want to talk about next week? Or is that you?
Perfect.
Again?
Actually, I'm going to hand this over to Yun Yin.
All right, guys. So next week, we will have Els. She's a researcher, trainer, and writer of this book, How to Research Trends. And she's going to do that together with Jeroen. And he's a creative designer. He's really cool because he makes concepts and products out from once used or leftover envelopes. And these guys love questions. So if you show us our next slide, Els is going to invite us virtually, personally.
Whoop.
Whoop.
We use brainstorms all the answers and quick solutions. But are we asking the right questions? Why not use question storming first and shift the focus from instant answers to explorative inquiry? Hello, wake up! Activate your innate ability again to question. In this session, Jeroen Timmer and Els Dracht will guide you into a collective question storm. We will use various techniques to help you to ask more, better, and creative questions. What are you waiting for? Sign up now.
So that was Els.
We use brainstorms all the time to get to instant answers.
Do it again.
Do it again. But now live, Els. Go ahead.
It was the first time we ever showed a video like that. So, you know, this is it's good. Failing forward.
Thank you, Yun Yin, for making this. And of course, we are also live here now just to see how all this system works and stuff. So to be extra prepared for next week.
Cool.
So hope to see you all also next week to ask a lot of questions.
Looking forward, yes.
Awesome, great. Well, with that, I think we're ready to officially open the backstage, and all of you are welcome to hang out, come behind the curtain, see what the messiness is all about, continue our discussion about systems design thinking, design thinking, whatever we want to talk about, or we could just talk about how bad it is for students to go back, how hard it is for parents and students and teachers to go back to this era of COVID. It's a fascinating topic as well. So this is the unstructured. If you thought the other stuff was structured, this is the unstructured.
I was very surprised that Els was there in real life. So Els was like, oh, she's there. It's like
surprise! Yes, let's go backstage.
That's a neat trick. That's awesome. Like, oh.
So I want to thank all you guys for attending. That was fun to do, and I hope you see that one of the things I think Jeroen and one other person was mentioning it. So much of what we do in design thinking using a tool is about the conversation. It's not necessarily the artifact that you create. And this created an opportunity for a conversation about what's in a system and how components of the system are connected. And as Colin just recognized in the chat, you know, in a place like South Africa, there are elements of the education system that we probably don't even consider in other places like security. So you obviously have to define the context up front when you have people getting into trying to design a system map. We didn't want to be presumptuous and say, do a system in England or America or whatever like that. We wanted everybody to have at it using their own experiences.
Steve, I have a question, Steve. So if, so because when you started, by the way, thank you very much for putting this out there. Really, really cool. I really like the fact that we spent time on talking about this and thinking about this. And because sometimes you take these things for granted, like, okay, of course we think about systems in service design thinking, but it's really nice to kind of spend time really making this explicit. However, you were talking about understanding sort of the consequences of a system and maybe the unintended consequences, right? So, which I'm really interested in, because I think that's where we need to go with whatever, you know, buzzwords we're using, but we need to go to understanding systems, ecosystems, and unintended consequences. But that is also future focused. So is systems mapping the way we've done, is it possible to, because now it's like, this is how it is now, but where do we put things like, where is what's the influence of whatever we're going to change in the systems in 10 years or 20 years or, you know,
right. Well, I think that map that I showed of the agricultural system, the local, kind of the local food system, to me, that's sort of the ideal, right? People talk about being locavores and eating locally and having a circle, a loop that, you know, you have production of food nearby and delivery of food and consuming of food, and then you're actually recycling the waste. So one of the things we could do is create the system map of the current system that acknowledges the problems and some of the issues. And then what does the future system look like? What's the ideal system? And then what do we have to change in the current system to get to that future system?
Yeah.
There are
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry?
No,
I'm gonna say, like, there's one thing I didn't talk about here, but you hear a lot in social science, and we see it in international development, is theory of change. So system maps are helpful in figuring out, like, what's your proposed theory of change when you're trying to improve healthcare in sub-Saharan Africa? Or, you know, what are you going to have to change in the system that's going to create these flow-on effects that impact the entire system?
And it's a technical term. This term theory of change. It seems obvious, but for me, the first time I heard it, I was like, "What the heck is that?" And it is what it says on the label. It's like a theory for, if you do this, this will happen, right? Like if you act on this component of the system in this way, it will have a flow and a flow-on effect on this component and the other components of the system, so that it's a way for, and then the other thing they tie that into is you know, before they fund a project at, you know, $5 million, $50 million, $500 million, or whatever it is, to change some part of you know, to make the maternal neonatal child healthcare in a developing country better, they ask for the people who are going to be doing the interventions to say, what do you think is going to happen? Tell us what you're going to act on in the system, and what your theory or your hypothesis is, or hypotheses are, for how, if you act this way, what it's going to have an effect here and here, and then what are all the unintended consequences. And then they go out and they say, okay, we're going to measure along the way, along time, to make sure that what your theory says is what actually is happening. And that part of it is actually new. That's called adaptive evaluation and adapting the way that they're doing change. Before, they used to just throw $5 million at a project, evaluate it in the middle, say, it's kind of working, and then evaluate at the end and say, oh, it kind of worked a little bit, right? And they're trying to do a lot more iterative, adaptive stuff. You see the overlay of design thinking and the way that we think with human-centered design, along with systems design. Going back on mute.
I have an idea about systems thinking and design thinking. I think that systems design thinking can be considered as a tool to test an assumption or an hypothesis within a system, It could also be used to make a system move from one state to another. So I think that they can be completely intertwined, interlinked. But I would still consider that the system thinking approach is the bigger picture, and the design thinking helps to get hold on what's going on in different parts of the system.
So is it also,
yeah.
So Sylvain, so because also going back to what you said earlier, I think, so I was told once, long time ago, when I was at a systems thinking event, with systems thinkers and systemic thinkers who were fighting each other. That's a different story. But they said to me, Arne, this is at the beginning of service design in Europe. They said, Arne, be careful, don't go the same route as systems thinking and systemic thinking, because they made it so complicated that nobody understood what to do with it. And so my kind of take on it has always been simplicity. So we are able to make it simple so we can do something, but also to your point, sort of, so we start understanding, because we make it small and simple, but we look at the bigger system, but we want to move the system. So it's also future orientated. So it's also about imagining a new future and moving that system towards that future. And you need to also not only do the research on all the data and describe the system as it is, but you have to also be able to imagine possible futures, and then try to kind of move that system towards that future, which is really tricky, obviously. But I think sort of design thinking, and all those agile methodologies came from the need to work in these complex systems, but to be able to do something and to make it simple enough so we can understand and we can move it. I think that's, to me, that's the.
I agree that this was the origin, probably to get a tool to deal better with this complexity, but that doesn't make disappear the complexity in the system. If we look at the CineFin model with its 4 situations, we all know that most situations we are confronted now are complex systems or chaotic systems, as the pandemic, and so we have to find ways to deal with a complex system without understanding every component all the time of it, and that's where design thinking helps. Hello.
Hello.
I just spotlighted Hannah. Sorry, Hannah, but is that your daughter or son? Incredibly cute.
Yeah, my son wants to.
The way to kind of make Sylvain stop talking, I guess.
No, not at all.
And I didn't talk too much.
He talks too much.
I didn't talk too much. You're
just too smart, man. You have too much information in your head. So I think that's. No, I know. You actually were very good, very good. I know you better. Yeah. No, you're totally right. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no.
I see.
Okay.
Who's going ahead?
Sorry.
Can I just wanted to share something. When I was doing the activity, one of the things that I realized is the brainstorming that happened right at the beginning. I was wondering if that would go all over the place, right? Which is all right. But the second part of it, which is the boundary, right? Creating the boundary part of it was very interesting. And I'm thinking, when I take on design thinking engagement, right, at an enterprise level, probably a systems thinking approach would be very useful. And if it is, let's say, sprints at a project level, it might be useful to use a human-centered design approach. So it's like a funneling of the problem from the large to the smaller, and it also helps us identify what is the real problem we want to work on. Just a thought.
I wonder, do we have any people who are systems thinking, systems design experts on this session, or they would consider themselves rather informed about this way of working.
UC just raised his hand, and Howard.
Well, let's hear from you guys.
Yeah, my original degree is in automation and systems technology, so I have the kind of engineering background into this, and the math part, which tends to lead to the problem Arne mentioned, that you get into too much detail, and it's hard to sell, for example, that kind of stuff. But there's also the problem that if you go too simple, then you end up with this kind of thing, like what is done a lot in politics, that there's some like super simple policy change that they think that will fix everything. For example, punishing people for being unemployed. That's something that will happen in Finland, and kind of there's an obvious feedback loop there that's completely missing. So yeah, at least get the feedback loops there, and that's already a lot better than just a linear design thing. But it's really easy to miss some of these kind of small details that actually end up, through a reinforcing loop, end up breaking the whole thing. So yeah. Making simple systems maps is really, really hard. Like,
well, it's like
that. Sorry, simple that are also useful. Like, there's always that everything is connected to everything. That's easy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because when during the session where everybody was in breakouts, a lot of the WebJam crew stayed back in the main room, and we had our own discussion and conversation that you can see in the YouTube recording if you're so inclined. But it's like most of the activities that we do in the design thinking world it's much more about the conversation than it is about the final artifact, right? It's about creating that shared understanding amongst the people that are having the conversation. And I think it's useful for us to just make sure that we're checking ourselves as we work for our clients, as we work on design projects and complex challenges, that we don't only think about the people, right? So that's the human-centered design part of it, but we think about the system that the people are in, and we do that to some degree. But I'm really interested to see, we've got a couple dozen people who are signed up to continue this conversation, to see what kinds of how we can bring that conversation into the design process that we're also familiar with. So yeah.
Mark,
so
your point about involving people in the actual design and features of the system are really, really important, because I think years ago, when systems design stuff was very, very large, the systems were designed by the consultants, and then the clients reacted to it. And in our case, we're talking about co-developing pieces and understanding and asking those questions as you develop it. And that is a very, very big and key difference. And I agree with Juice and the example he gave. If you didn't look at it of this very complex system kind of thing, that it really is the process of asking all the questions as you develop that and put those in place will lead you to another level.
So I work in sustainability in agriculture. So systems is a big part about what I do. One of the I see these two, and I use all of this, and I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but I'm proficient. I see these as two sides of the same coin. And the way I look at design thinking is I look at it as a guiding principle. So it really is about where's my focus, not so much about how I'm doing things, because in certain instances, I have to use system design to analyze and dig in and really try to understand the spheres of influence. But then when I take my approach to solving problems, because my focus is around human-centered design, I flip that and I say, okay, well now what is the impact on the human and what is desirable? And so I see them as complementary and basically just, it's two philosophies of the same thing. They're tools of each other is the way I see it. I use both.
Thanks, Jeff. And I, Yeah, I think they are totally complementary. It's trying to figure out how to sequence the different lenses that you're putting on things as you zoom in, zoom out on problems. I think Hannah, you had a question or a comment?
Oh, just curious about, I think that in our group and my experience of making the systems map, it was really easy to think about the institutions and then somewhat easier to put in things like computers or tech access. But I think there's also these mental modes and cultural assumptions that are a big part of the system. And I'm wondering if there are ways to include those in a systems map. I guess one of them is maybe the connection between institutions and the assumptions one has about the other, but just wondering if there are other practices for kind of acknowledging that aspect of a system.
I don't have an example offhand. That very simple map that I showed earlier about poverty, literacy, and unemployment, I would think instead of thinking about organizations or people, you could map attitudes and think about how systems produce or reinforce attitudes and map those conditions and how you would tweak that. I mean, I can, now that you've raised it, I can think about a lot of things like maybe racism or attitudes about poor people or attitudes about immigrants. Like, how do we create those ideas that we have in our head, from childhood through the media and all the different things that are influencing those attitudes. And then what's your theory?
Yeah, I think it is in the connections, but it's also maybe, I don't know if there are rules about system mapping, but like you could say that there's if you get somebody who's better at this stuff than I am, like a graphic designer, to depict these things, maybe it goes from being a pure system map to more of an infographic, but then, that's the power of in many ways, the power of graphic design is to be able to depict the complexity of things. Certainly not like the map that UC shared, but designers are really good at taking complex things and making them digestible. And I think that you could have an overlay or a color wash or something that says, here is where a certain thing is happening culturally, or, here's where the intersection between cultures are, or different aspects of us messy, soft, squishy human beings as we come together and as we act individually.
Group 11 had a very interesting discussion on the role of alcohol in this. Did we put it as a box, or was it an arrow through so many things? It was a very interesting discussion point. Jenny, you might want to comment, or Juice.
Yeah, I ended up making it a label for a cluster there. But yeah, basically it's what causes the curriculum, I think, also. Anyway, all the arrows were alcohol in practice.
I could hardly keep up with the conversation and all the stickets and the arrows, but I did have an answer or a question. I don't know if it's an answer or a question, but if anybody here who's involved in building these complex systems, have you tried to build them on a 3-dimensional level? So I put a comment or a question. Oh, I see David's got a thumbs up there, but I mean, if you haven't tried, it's really, really empowering way to share visually your inner knowledge, put it on the table, and then start co-creating and co-combining with the people around the table. I think it's a bit more difficult, of course, in this context, Jenny, because we're on the...
Michael's not here anymore, but I think he would, what he said was here.
Ryan.
Hi, Jenny, this is Ryan Schnackenberg. I'm with Connected Design. 3D means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Please describe what you mean by, have you done a 3D systems design map?
Well, I mean 3D in any way, but what I'm specifically personally talking about is in Lego. So using, I mean, it's a very easy modular way to build out concepts. So, and you can get to people, I saw some people nodding as I was talking, but I'm sure there are other ways of doing 3-dimensional. Lego's just one way, of course.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share what Michael Thorley said before he left when we were in the main room. So he would say, make a so actually put that system out on the floor and walk, across it, and walk from one, element to another, because and that's how you can actually feel how these connections are made, or whether you're missing something. So that's part of, what do you call that, embodiment, right? So
constellation. A constellation.
Yeah, constellations. So having that as a I think it's just, like to your point, making it physical, and also making it something that you can actually feel. And I am someone who can be quite skeptical of these things. But then I tried it, and I thought, no, it actually works really well. It is very useful, specifically if you do it with a group. It helps the conversation a lot. Just either you use Lego or something, but I really enjoy, if you have the room, if you have the space, put it out on the floor and see how that system, walk from one element to the other.
Where did that bias, skepticism come from? Where did the bias and skepticism about?
Yeah, it's a good question. It comes from, it's probably a place of insecurity of mixing emotional responses to sort of something that might seem very rational. I don't know. I have to dig a little deeper inside of myself. I'm a split personality. I can be very cynical, and at the same time, I'm totally open to everything. So that's sort of the fight. Maybe it's like, maybe there's a part of, am I looking ridiculous now? Because is this really true? So there's all these, in constellations, you have those moments. It's like with these games that we play in design thinking. Before I did that, I hated it myself, but then I understand the value. So that's simply in my personality, that fight is going on. So yeah, somewhere there. I don't like looking ridiculous, and at the same time, I really don't mind. So anyway, sorry, someone else wanted to ask me a personal question.
Jim had something to say, Jim?
Well, I've been trying to figure out how to frame this into a short question. I don't know that I can. So if I think of systems engineering, to me, it's usually like, what got me into it was the way the Postal Service worked. And I worked on IBM's first robotic, manufacturing line, and it's how to make the way airline schedules more efficient, or the way Postal Service is more efficient. So it's kind of a point in process on a point of a process that has a larger goal, whether it's to get people someplace efficiently or make money or both. And what I don't know, because I don't know that much about design thinking yet, I don't know how design thinking would look at that. And if I go back to some of the talks, a lot of them seem to be about products, can be about a process. But this is where I think, where is design thinking different than that? Because systems engineering now is very data oriented and very process oriented, and coding and moving that way. There are the ones like UC shared, but that's what I was thinking about, is how does design thinking play in that world or compare to that? Because that to me would be very interesting, particularly on the cultural side. How do I make the experience better for somebody who goes into an airport or goes and checks in on a plane? That's the kind of question I'm trying to, in my mind, when I compare and contrast them, that's what I keep coming back to, is I'm trying to understand that difference. So kind of a broader question, probably not good to end on, but that's what I've been trying to frame up for a few minutes.
I think you can look at it in one way. You can look at it as zooming in and zooming out on a problem, right? I think design thinking tends to approach things, my understanding of design thinking in human-centered design is it is approaching the problem from the perspective of the needs of the humans that you're designing for. Systems design, almost by definition, approaches it from the perspective of the system. And that's a really big zoomed out view, depending on where you set your boundaries, right? And as an engineer as well, Jim, I UC also, it's easy for us to abstract humans out of what we do as engineers, right? And the value of the human-centered design approach is that it doesn't do that, right? It includes the humans and the interface between the humans and the technology, right? Systems design says, okay, it's not just one or two humans or a handful of humans. It's this whole, you could look at it at the societal level, or, you know, if you're doing this work for clients inside of organizations, there's systems inside these organizations, complex systems of departments and peoples and reporting lines and communication and values and incentives and reinforcements and those kind of things that are all acting. And I guarantee you that most organizations have no clue. They have no visual understanding of how that whole system works other than an organization chart, right? So it could be really interesting to decompose and sort of, you know, look at the system of even a department within an organization or a business unit or something like that. And then you start seeing the people and you start seeing the technology, you know, that's all, it all meshes together in some way. It's like if you want to work on a house, you can't just build a house with a hammer. You have to have a saw and a screwdriver and, you know, all kinds of other things that help you build it.
You think?
Howard has a point. Howard, go ahead.
Yeah, Mark is absolutely right on that. And just to share a case study for Jim, airport, right? You mentioned airport. So this is something that I used to do with Emirates Airlines. System design, we would map out all the systems that entail empowering employees, that entail servicing our clients. And then we would map out the stakeholders around that, the product owners, the department heads. We would map out operations, employees. We would map out who's at front stage, who's at backstage. And we would map it out with the service blueprint. And then we would even go to a higher level in an organizational overview and say, okay, who guards which gate and who owns which territory, so that we could make forward with a decision so that this could happen because it affects this place. Yep. And then where design thinking comes in is more of, I would say, like a philosophy within the organization so that they could start collaborating forward. So it's more of design thinking is, if it's like the funnel of focus, design thinking would be over here, but it just goes up and down. And then system is just overarching and all over. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover. So we are at the bottom of the hour. I would love to figure out a satisfying way to end the conversation, but unfortunately there's not really an easy way. But I would like to thank Steve for doing a great job at designing this session and opening up this conversation that hopefully we'll be able to continue with anybody who's interested in joining us in this conversation as we look at ways to integrate the systems view into our design thinking work. Any other comments from the crew before we sign off? Because we got to end it somewhere, folks.
Just come back next time.
Yeah, come back next week. We're going to have a great one next week. So we're really looking forward to it. Thanks, Steve, for doing a great job. See you guys next week. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.